Should you move to North Carolina? A lot, and I mean a lot of people are. And not everyone is happy with their decision, but will you like it? That all depends. YouTube showed me a video the other day about someone who had moved here and then left because she hated it.
Okay, so if you followed my channel at all, this won't be a spoiler. We did not like living in North Carolina at all.
I have no doubt that she was miserable here, and I have no doubt that the things that she hated about North Carolina were true to her. I think she really believed the things she said, but that doesn't necessarily mean that her perspectives and opinions are shared by everyone who moves here.
Just because we didn't like living in North Carolina at all doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it and that you might not absolutely love it. So yay, you.
Or that they were even objectively accurate. Many of the things that bug people about North Carolina are subjective. To me, because of my life experience and personality, I might think that one thing is fantastic, but you might think that it's awful, and that's okay. And I'm going to address some of those issues in this video so you can decide before you uproot your life and incur the expense of moving across the country. I want you to have a more accurate picture of North Carolina, at least as accurate as I can make it. I do also want to point out that some things people believe are simply incorrect and can be demonstrated to be wrong. I'm going to talk about that as well because in part of this video that I watched, Nurse Liz, whose channel it is, made some false statements about the Wake County school system. I reached out to Wake County schools and had one of their representatives come on my live show to set the record straight. I'll link that for you when we get to that part of the video. Now, some of her points about North Carolina were true. There is always good and bad in everything, and depending on who you are and what is important to you, what's good for one person could be bad for another. So today I'm taking some of Nurse Liz's points and I'm giving a more nuanced and more balanced perspective to them. So if you can't handle these 5 things that I'm about to talk about, you should probably avoid North Carolina. And we're going to start with the easy ones and get more controversial as I move through the list. We're going to get to politics, race, and religion. You're getting the real deal today. The first one is traffic.
The traffic. Oh, the traffic. There's a lot of it.
When you move to a place that's growing, especially one that's growing as quickly as North Carolina is, it takes time for the roads to be able to handle the traffic when there's a large number of people moving. It takes money to build roads. Nurse Liz was living in southwestern Wake County. She didn't say, but if I had to guess, I would say she was probably living in Fuquay-Varina. It just sounded like it from her descriptions.
The Triangle area, which is the area we were living in, that's what they call it, is like exploding in terms of people going and moving there. And the roads were just not made to keep up with it. They were made for more like rural travel. Anyway, it means anytime you go anywhere, you're just going to be sitting on a lot of traffic, whether that's on...
I lived in Fuquay myself in 2000 when I moved to the Triangle. There were only 6,000 people there when I moved there. Today's population in Fuquay is almost 34,000 people. Now, think about this for a minute. Can you imagine what it would have cost if we had started building roads back when I lived there and the expense of the road development was spread across only 6,000 people? It's millions of dollars to build roads. It simply isn't possible for a small population to afford to build to that extent for the future. I mean, I do believe that it's good to invest in infrastructure for the future, but 6,000 people is not enough people to do that. So when moving to these kinds of small towns, the growth has to be enough to support the cost of building the infrastructure. There's a critical mass that you have to get to before it's possible to build the roads that you need. But if the planning is there, you can implement the expansion when it's needed. This happened in Cary. Back when we moved here, Cary was only half the size that it is now, and they were in the process of all of the widening of their roads. Many of the beautiful loops and parkways that new residents enjoy today didn't exist or weren't wide enough 20 years ago, but they had reached that critical mass so that they could afford to improve their infrastructure. If you're moving to a small town in North Carolina, any small town, if it's within commuting distance to a major employment center, you should expect there to be traffic. If your commute regularly takes you into LA or New York City, I don't think you'll worry about the type of traffic that we have here at all.
You guys know I'm originally from New York City, but now I live in North Carolina. And let me tell you some weird things out here. Barely any traffic. The cars are actually moving.
School redistricting is one of the areas where the video I saw was presenting false information.
I'm worried about the school situation actually. So even though we lived a quarter of a mile from our elementary school, the schools near us were completely full. So they were taking the kids out and they were being bused an hour and a half away to other areas of the county, which
in my 6 years, I've never seen that. From a financial standpoint, that would make no sense for us to do that. Logistically, we use buses for elementary, middle, and high school. To tie up a bus for 90 minutes would cause a delay at all three levels. It just wouldn't happen.
While
now.
school redistricting is a thing here, there has never in the history of the Triangle been a time when students sat on buses for 90 minutes when being bused to school. Oh, wait a second. There actually was that one ice storm when all the buses got stuck on the roads and kids never made it home from school. Kindergartners in buses overnight on the highway. That was ugly. And this is a great place to talk about weather. Wake County schools learned their lesson that afternoon. That's why when there's ice or snow in the forecast, they cancel schools. So don't complain if you move here. The Mid-Atlantic region gets very different precipitation from the north. Snow is fluffy and happy and it squishes down when you drive your car over it. This other stuff is evil. You cannot drive on it. You cannot walk on it. Now imagine there are little kids in school buses. It only happens like once or twice a year, and sometimes not at all because we have such mild winters. And everyone who moves here makes fun of Southerners driving in the snow until they experience it. Some of you know that Timothy used to be a teacher. He had one principal who moved here from Idaho. This was a private school, so in the past, before this principal, they always followed Wake County schools to decide if they were going to close for inclement weather. But Mr. Idaho thought that it was silly to let people leave early before the storm started. It took Timothy 4 hours to get home from school that day. His school never did that again. Another principal from New York decided not to cancel school even though Wake County had closed. When he arrived at school, he slid his car right into one of the academic buildings. He didn't do that again either. It isn't snow, and it's not that we're too stupid to drive in the snow. We don't get snow, we get ice. But back to the redistricting. About 10% of our schools are capped every year. Capped means that they're full and not accepting new students. So if you buy a home in a capped school zone, your child will be sent to an overflow school. The overflow school is usually very similar and very close to the capped school. This is what Wake County Schools Student Assignment Administrator Louis Ambrico had to say about capped schools.
Are there some overflow schools that are 6 miles away? Yes, there are. And overflow schools are decided based on the seat availability within that general area. I'd like to say most of them are no more than 4 miles away on average, but there are cases where they are 7 and 8 miles away.
You can watch the rest of that video here, but don't go away yet because we're talking about politics next. If you move to North Carolina, you're going to be living next to people who are different from you, people who think differently than you, people who vote differently than you. To people who come from areas that are very politically homogenous, this might feel like North Carolina is very conservative. Listen to what Nurse Liz says about politics in North Carolina.
The area that we lived in was very conservative and very church-going, which is absolutely A-okay. Obviously. However, we're like pretty liberal and we don't go to church. And so that was just, we had a really hard time connecting with people on any deeper level because we didn't share a lot of the same values or general thoughts about life.
And now actually look at how people vote in the area where Liz was living. It's leaning liberal. She was in fact surrounded by more liberals than conservatives. But if you are from a very liberal area like Nurse Liz was, North Carolina might seem conservative to you. I interviewed Sir Ashley. He's a realtor in Charlotte and he used to live in California. This is what he said about the difference between North Carolina and California politics.
Not to get too off left field, but I like to think I'm liberal, right?
Okay.
I like to think I'm liberal, but when you live in California, you realize, and you're not from California, or not you realize just how conservative you really are.
Not that liberal, not California liberal.
Yeah, I'm not that liberal. So Charlotte gives me that good medium to where I'm a liberal, but I'm not. I'm not that liberal.
The truth is, North Carolina is what we call moderate. I know that's kind of a crazy concept these days. That doesn't mean that everyone here is moderate. No, there are always people who get, let's just say, super invested in their politics. I have liberal friends, I have conservative friends, I get along with all of them and they get along with each other. But we have those super political people in North Carolina, although I feel like it's just not as common as in other places. If you're super political and you have trouble getting along with someone on the other side of the political spectrum, regardless of which which side it's on, you might want to avoid moving here. If you move to North Carolina, you're going to be living next to people who are different from you. A lot of people have this idea that the South is more segregated and more racially volatile than other parts of the country. Now, I'm not saying there isn't racism here. There's racism everywhere because humans are flawed and we don't always live up to our best possible selves. What I am saying is that a lot of people's understanding about the South comes from movies and television, not from actually living here. Let me drop just a few truth bombs on you about issues of race in the South compared to other parts of the country. According to the Washington Post, housing segregation between Black and white residents is most pervasive above the Mason-Dixon line. Of America's 25 most racially segregated metropolitan areas, just 5 are in the South, so 20 are in the North. Northern cities like Detroit, Milwaukee, and New York top the list. Segregation in northern metro areas has declined a bit since 1990, but an analysis of 2010 census data found that Detroit's level of segregation, for instance, is nearly twice as high as Charleston's. Leave your preconceived notions at the door about race in North Carolina.
So is the South racist? I believe that's a loaded question because, we're in America, right? And I grew up in upstate New York. And I can say that the most racism I've experienced was in upstate New York. And I've been in the South since 2002 as a family. So is the South racist? Yeah, depending on where you go, it is. Mm-hmm. And then we can get into it. But it's not a South problem. It's an American problem. So
yeah. You are going to be living next to people different from you. Is there an echo in here? You're going to be living next to people different from you. You're going to be living next to people different from you. First, I want to start by saying that the roots of modern North Carolina are in the Bible Belt.
When Sir Walter Raleigh had laid his head upon the executioner's block, and the officer asked if his head lay right, Sir Walter Raleigh said, "It matters little, my friend, how the head lies, provided the heart is right."
There is legit a church on every corner. Many people here are not religious. I would actually say that the majority of people here are not religious, even if they are Christians, or they are religions other than Christianity. There's a large Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim community in Raleigh, and I've seen temples of different religions often when I travel throughout the state, even in more rural areas. But the Christian culture here is very strong.
Come from New England to the South, specifically Massachusetts to North Carolina, is I've noticed a great difference in the openness of religions. It's not in your face. People seem to really believe and practice what they're hearing. They're congenial, they're thoughtful, and it's not a big deal. For instance, if I'm going to a breakfast or a lunch meeting, I'll hesitate for a little bit before I dig into my meal, just in case the other person on the other side of the table wants to stop and do a prayer before they eat. And I find that very well done. And they're not pushing it on me. They're just doing what they believe thing. And it's just their thing. There's not a barrier of any sort. It's just it just happens to be who they are, and it seems all to be so well accepted.
I was actually pretty surprised when I first became a realtor in 2015. I went to an event put on by the Raleigh Association of Realtors, and they opened that event with a prayer, and it was not a non-denominational prayer. It was a Christian prayer. I'll admit, I did feel a little strange with this at a professional organization. I could have complained and said that I was uncomfortable, but I chose to take it as a positive and uplifting experience where the person leading that event wanted to bring a sense of positivity into it. They were recognizing in that meeting that this is not all about money. This is about something bigger than us, helping people with what for many of them is the biggest financial transaction of their lives. So you likely will encounter people who take their Christianity very seriously. Now, I don't think you'll have a hard time if you're not religious. Obviously, Nurse Liz really did have a hard time with this culture. In my experience, and like we saw with my colleague Joe, Christians do act out their religion very publicly in their speech and in their daily lives. And like I also said, these more outspoken individuals individuals are not even the majority of people here, but it is the culture of many who were born and raised here. If you're really sensitive to people who openly talk about their faith in daily conversation, you might feel uncomfortable here. I mean, I do think it's totally possible for you to find your non-religious people, but at some point you will encounter this strong faith-based type of personality. If you liked this video, you might also like this analysis that I did about the types of people who leave North Carolina.